Hi, everyone. Welcome to 40 Minutes of Faith. Today's topic is gloom and stress, and our guest is Carol Espique. I met Carol in Germany through the military chapel. Carol grew up in a Christian home and got married at 21. After 7 years, they divorced, and during that time, she was diagnosed with anxiety. It was scary, but Carol was very proactive about her mental health. She was trying to find herself and decided to focus on God before she went into another relationship. Carol never pictured herself moving, let alone marrying someone in the military, and now she's been a military spouse for 6 years. Carol and her husband want to put God first and follow God's will. As is common for many military families, they moved to Georgia, had a child, and the Air Force sent Carol's husband on a deployment. They moved to Germany 3 years ago and are currently in North Carolina. Carol was taking online classes in Germany towards a social work degree. She wants to encourage others and talk about how we can get help or support in new seasons of life. It's okay to ask for help. Carol, how are things in North Carolina this summer?
It's getting hot, so we usually just stay inside and stay in the air conditioning. But we did venture out this weekend and went to the pool here at our apartment and just really enjoyed spending time, just me, my husband, and our son. We've hardly had that time to do with schoolwork and moving in and therapies for Nolan, so it was just nice to have a couple of hours to just focus on us.
Great, that sounds really nice. Our Bible passage today is in the book of Amos, which is near the middle of your Bible between the book of Daniel and the New Testament. I'm going to read today Amos chapter 5, verses 18 to 24 in the New Revised Standard Version. Alas for you who desire the day of the Lord. Why do you want the day of the Lord? It is darkness, not light, as if someone fled from a lion and was met by a bear, or went into the house and rested a hand against the wall and was bitten by a snake. Is not the day of the Lord darkness, not light, and gloom with no brightness in it? I despise your festivals, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them, and the offerings of well-being of your fatted animals I will not look upon. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps, but let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Carol, this might sound a little gloomy and depressing, but let's unpack it a little bit and see how things are going, both in our lives and maybe in the lives of the folks living at the time. Do we have seasons of gloom in our lives that could be depression and or anxiety?
I definitely think so. I know during deployments or during your PCS season, which is your permanent change of station, it just feels like nothing can go right. You can ask any military spouse, and if you're on a deployment, the first thing is things just start breaking in the house. Like,
correct.
My friend, her husband's gone. She said for first week, her dishwasher stopped working.
Mm-hmm.
It's just crazy. It's just an adjustment, it's a little challenge to remind you, hey, you need to definitely be independent, but it does teach you to trust in God. Luckily, being in the military, you just have such a great support system. You don't have to wait around for people to become your friends or your family. Like, everyone's in the same position and so open to accepting you. And they're like, hey, my husband can come mow your yard. That's no problem. Your dishwasher broke. We know someone. We've just been so blessed that there's been so many people that God's put in our lives that have always been there. I've never really felt alone.
That's one benefit to being a military family. And of course, there's many, but also the challenges, like you mentioned. And everybody's kind of in the same boat, so you don't mind getting to know each other a little quicker maybe than normal, because you don't have like 2 years to wait around and get to know each other, because by then it's almost time to get ready to move on to the next place. So that's
Exactly.
a good example and a good resource. Have you ever felt gloomy or separated from God?
I would say probably before I met my husband, I was definitely experiencing that. I think I was trying to find my path back to him, but also trying to figure out who I was. I grew up in a small town, so I always felt like I was Susan and Jerry's daughter or Jennifer's sister.
Mm-hmm.
I never just kind of had who I was. And until you know who you are, it's really hard to establish relationships with anyone else. And I think that's the same with even a relationship with God. Like, you have to kind of know who you are so that you can trust other people. I'd gone to a very small church, Southern Baptist in a small town, and grew up there, and it fit me for a little while. That you go through seasons and you change, and it's not good or bad, it's just life. I decided that it was time for me to find churches that I felt like fit more me. We've tried some pretty extreme churches with a live band where I felt like I was at a concert, and that wasn't really what I was looking for. I finally did end up returning to my parents, and then once Edmund and I started dating, he had found a church he was established in and that had couples our age. So it was nice to start going with him. I feel like during that time, God was just using that time for me to open my eyes. I guess small towns are good for people, but I think maybe I needed something a little more. I feel like during that time, I was able to experience other churches or just things more so than a small town. So that was good. I think it was meeting some of what I was missing in my life.
Yeah, and you ended up all the way across the ocean on this military assignment in Germany, and now you're back. And I'm pretty sure, Carol, that I know you well enough. If I can just double check this, when you said it was really nice that there were other couples your age in this other church, you're not there just looking for social stuff and fun, but even when you're in a Bible study, we can learn from our elders by all means, so having full respect. But then sometimes it's just nice to be on a faith walk, maybe with folks who are sort of in our same life stage. Does that sound like it's fair to say?
I would definitely say that. I was probably like the only person at my church who was about my age, and everybody was either married and had kids or like in college. So I was kind of in this in between, and I just kind of fell along. But I definitely adored, like I would help my parents with the senior adult Christmas party. I was just looking for a connection more, my peers.
Yep. Now, some parts of our passage in Amos today sound a little scary, and I'm wondering, how can we approach times that feel like we're running from a bear, and then we meet a lion, and then we get bitten by a snake? And I hope all that's metaphorically. That doesn't happen with real life too often, but kind of when our souls might be facing some scary stuff.
Yes. That's when you're kind of looking at life and you're like, I kind of think that maybe some people feel like 2020 may be like this. You get through one thing and there's something else for you to face. It really can beat you down. But I know in my head I had made a comment and I like immediately regretted even thinking that, oh, this is end times. I thought God was supposed to rapture Christians up and not be feeling all this. And then I immediately realized that, you know what? My husband still has his job. We still get our paycheck every other week. We have food in our pantry. None of us are sick. We have access to the doctor. I'm like, really, Carol? Like, you need to just shut your mouth because you have it really good. Kind of just be quiet and listen. I feel like God is just like, let's see what else is going on. Let's not focus on poor you, your first world problems, but like, hey, I'm speaking to you and it's time to listen. So I feel like he has used this time and I'm just kind of buckled in and hoping for the best at this.
Yeah. What does that listening sometimes look like for you? I know you said be still a few minutes ago.
Yeah. I don't think we can ever be done growing personally. So as you mentioned, I'm going to school. When I first started into the program for social work, I really didn't know where I was going with it. And there has been just incidences where I have been educated in situations to lead me to what I would like to leave my focus on. So in a way, he is still working on me, but he's also using outside influences for me to see. I think I have a heart and passion for.
Great. So some of it might come from our own spiritual seeking discernment, and then we can observe kind of what's going on in the world and try to put it together. You had mentioned going to school. Everybody has a different situation in high school and finishing up with high school and starting a family and working. So how did you end up saying, I'm going to really just give this a try? It might be hard. I might have some challenges, but I really want to go back to school.
I can honestly say that God has blessed me with an amazing husband who supports me, and it's definitely harder to get jobs overseas, as you know. So Nolan was getting ready to go into preschool, and not that I was unhappy, but I felt like I was just kind of getting bored now that Nolan's a little bit older. He's 4.5, so he was 3 at the time and not quite as dependent, obviously, as a newborn. So my husband's in school, and he was like, well, maybe it's time for you to look at school. And honestly, I had no idea what I was going to go for. I have an associate degree in early childhood development, and I had worked in the classroom, and I had tried to go back for my 4-year degree, but it was not speaking to me at all. I really like to help people. I definitely had some questions about politics and just things in the world. And I guess I just started looking back on things that I was raised on, things that I feel like people had different views on from what I did. And either I need to be more open-minded, or I need to look at the Bible and see what it says to make sure that these things that I'm feeling I want to support lined up with the Bible. Mm-hmm. So first it just kind of started with looking at social programs itself, because my husband grew up without a father. So his idea of a social program was totally different than mine. Honestly, mine was kind of people who just chose not to work and were lazy. Mm-hmm. And my husband's like, well, what about the people who are trying? And his mom is a single mom. She had 3 boys. She is an amazing woman. Mm-hmm. I didn't get to know her for very long, but she raised 3 sons to be awesome fathers, great husbands. And she always made sure that her parents were around, and her brother and his wife were around to help shape these boys. So that was amazing. They grew up on social programs because their mom worked, but she had 3 boys, and they lived in Florida, and you're trying to catch up. But in situations like that, obviously you're probably not going to catch up on like a minimum wage job. And
correct. Yeah.
These things started playing a part in my mind. I'm like, wait a minute. There are people out there who are trying, but it's not their fault. So the more I looked, I was just like, oh, well, this class sounds really interesting. And it kind of all ended up under the program of social work.
That's right.
Definitely not something I had on my radar at all. I'm taking classes, but with the changes in the world that are happening right now, I mean, you are seeing so many oppressed groups, and they've always been there. They've always been there. It's like you said, that it was in the Bible. They were there in the Bible. We need to do something. I feel like I'm important again, or that I'm something besides a wife and a mom or a military spouse. It's definitely given me something that's my own, and I love that. I've really missed that. And education is something that no one can ever take from you. So there's always something to learn. I was, with all the changes going on and me questioning how I grew up as a conservative Republican, most people are not really towards social programs. I kind of always felt like it was bad, or like a bad use of money. I was just kind of really questioning everything. I was lucky to be able to go to a Christian college, and that definitely helps relate worldly views back to the Bible or what's going on. I mean, if you think about it, Jesus was kind of a social worker. He was always hanging out with the crowd nobody really wanted to, but those are the people who needed him. And there are so many people in the world who need us. I've just learned about all the programs where there's just gaps and people are just falling into them. You think of kids who are in foster care, and then they turn 18 and they age out, and maybe they've just been bounced around, and then it's like, oh, well, you're out of our hands now. What do they do? They may not have had a good education. They may find themselves homeless, and it's like not the system's problem anymore.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking. There are some states that have programs in place, but that comes down to money. Also, are the people in that state willing to have money go to support, say, 18-year-olds who are transitioning out of foster care? Because they may have learned how to budget their own money, but nobody can afford their own apartment. And I lived with roommates after college, but even the example you gave of your mother-in-law, working and raising kids, obviously that's not the exact same thing, but if you want to go to school and you're trying to do your homework and hold a job so that you can pay your rent, I don't mind paying a little bit more taxes if it means that these kids can get a little extra help as they're transitioning.
Exactly. I was really worried about that. Being a first trimester, the clinic on base also offered a program for a home nurse to come to my house.
Yes.
Like every other week. And I think she may have been part of the new parent support program.
Yeah, I worked for them in Germany. Yeah. Okay. It's still around.
So this was in Georgia at an Air Force base, and she would come out, and I want to say that it seemed like more of her caseload were probably like younger airmen and their wives who could struggle financially, or She said that she knew that some families only had like one car. So if the spouse was at work, the other spouse was at home all day and really couldn't go anywhere. It helped me out so much. And I just remember what a blessing it was to have her. She was like an angel sent, because like I needed that during that time. But I mean, I did suffer from postpartum after I had Nolan. She understood. She didn't just think I was losing it. Like she really understood. So
that's nice. It sounds like you didn't feel judged, but you did feel supported. Right. And so big shout out to the Air Force New Parent Support Program. I know the Army has something similar. And then there's also non-military kind of community organizations. Again, kind of depends on where you live, what supports are available. But I'm so grateful, Carol, that you are willing to be open and honest and maybe vulnerable, because, you know, we sometimes think, well, depending on maybe where you live or how you grew up, at least I was taught, be strong, suck it up, figure it out, you'll be okay. But there's real benefits to having other people around, and whether it's a professional like a nurse, or there's a group called MOPS, Mothers of Preschoolers. It's kind of like a peer group that sometimes other people can be a wonderful resource to help us through our tough times. Didn't you end up volunteering to be in the leadership of MOPS for a while?
I did. When I first moved to Germany, I had heard about the MOPS group in Georgia. I'm one of those people, I need connections, I need friends. So as soon as we found out we were moving to Germany, I'm all over like Stuttgart page looking. Luckily, we were so blessed that my cousins were stationed in Stuttgart with us.
Wow.
So we had family as soon as we got there, which was amazing. So we didn't feel alone. But I got in touch with the coordinator, and she's like, well, sometimes there are limited spaces available. So she said that if you were a table leader or a coordinator, then you automatically got in. So I'm like, shoot, sign me up. I'll be the head of something. No problem. If that guarantees that I'm going to make some friends when I get there, I can do that.
I know some of the rooms were smaller and they could only have a certain number of kids.
I'm like, what do you have available? So I became a table leader. I really didn't know what it was. I'd heard other people talk about it, and that was definitely a saving grace when I got to Germany. The ladies there were great. I made friends, and since I was on the steer team, I got to go to extra meetings, which was nice because that was basically a mommy play date where we would let the kids play and we would discuss what we were going to talk about at our next meeting. But it was also a little for us to complain or just adult interaction. And then the coordinator ended up moving back to the States. So me and another girl decided we would be the coordinators, and we enjoyed it. And we tried to reach out to some of our community resources, just because so many of the spouses don't know what's going on base. We take care of the family. Maybe people think it sounds a little 50-ish or whatever, but I think I've become so much stronger and so much more independent since becoming a military spouse. But my son was diagnosed with autism, so I was kind of introduced to some of the therapies and services that are offered to families on base. And if you feel like your child has any kind of delay, or you're just like, well, something just kind of seems amiss, you can call them without having to get a referral from your PCM, which is very important with TRICARE. So you can go to them and they'll come out to your house and do like a little screen for your child.
It's called early intervention in some states, and they do exactly what you said, the screenings, and then provide different kinds of supports. Was that an emotional process, Carol, for you and your husband to think about, oh gosh, do we need to find out if there's a diagnosis here in this situation?
I had worked in preschool previously, definitely not an expert, but as a mom would do always think of worst case scenarios. So, I mean, it wasn't like it had never ran through my mind, but I'm like, okay, we'll do the screening process. And luckily we had a great PCM for Nolan who kind of caught things early. When we first moved there to Germany, Nolan was like a couple of months shy from being 2. And our doctor noticed some eye contact issues.
Yeah.
So then we go back at 2.5, and he's kind of making some notes. And then at 3, he's like, I think it's time for you to see a specialist, which there wasn't one there. So we had to go to Landstuhl.
Yeah.
I didn't particularly care for the specialist. Not that I'm not saying he didn't know how to do his job, but what I guess I was expecting for him to do, like spend more time with Nolan and talk to Nolan and play with him.
Yeah.
he didn't really do. He kind of looked more over some paperwork and asked Edmund and I some questions. And
Okay.
I felt like, I really wish you'd spend more time with Nolan,
Yeah.
because obviously my answers were different than Edmund's answers on this paperwork we had to fill out. I spend more time with Nolan.
Right.
And I felt like even if he didn't do those things, he definitely had the capabilities to do those things that were listed on that paper.
Mm-hmm.
And then we saw a doctor and he said Nolan did not have autism. So I'm like, okay. But he recommended like early preschool for Nolan and for us to go ahead and get into speech therapy and OT.
Okay.
Once again, this stuff went to our doctor in Germany and he wrote everything out for the max, like 50 visits. So they were really quick on early intervention, which was good. I know even in the States, people are missing it and they're getting those late diagnoses. And by then, those little times that their little brains are just like sponging everything up, they've missed that. So we started all that. And then 6 months later, I'm like, oh, we should probably make an appointment with a developmental specialist. It's been 6 months.
Yeah.
So we're still doing good, see if we see progress. But of course, military community, your developmental specialist that you saw 6 months ago is no longer there.
Correct.
So you see a new developmental specialist.
Yep.
And she's like, your son has autism and he should have been diagnosed with it back in February. Autism isn't something you develop, you have it when you're born. So if he didn't have it 6 months ago, I wasn't expecting him to develop it in 6 months.
Yeah, some kids have more vocabulary in speech and then they regress a little bit, but that does not sound like it's what you had observed.
Yeah, no.
Like
I mean, obviously we were taking the therapy, so I'm thinking if anything, this lady's going to say, oh my gosh, she's making
right.
That's what I'm expecting, not what she told me.
Yeah.
So we definitely had some times of sadness. There's also times of blame of your like, maybe we should have done this, or if he was on a stricter schedule, or didn't watch too much TV, or just anything that I guess you're just trying to really find a period, cause. No one really wants the comma. They don't want it to keep going. You want an answer. And there just really wasn't one. So once we got that, then he qualified for ABA therapy, which is applied behavior analysis.
Yes.
And I don't know, on the spectrum now, there's not like Asperger's and autism. Is now, from what I understand, it looks like it's ASD.
Autism spectrum disorder?
And it's either a level 1, level 2, or a level 3.
Okay, so they've changed a little bit the names, how they're identifying.
Yes,
different.
From what I understand.
Okay.
So I don't think there's like Asperger's anymore or whatever else there was out there. Nolan was diagnosed with ASD level 1, so autism spectrum disorder level 1, which means high functioning.
Okay.
And the doctor says it just may mean that his personality is a little quirky. We could not get the ABA therapy covered by TRICARE until he had the diagnosis.
Right.
So I've also learned so much through that even if kids are borderline, sometimes they may go ahead and give that diagnosis just so they can go ahead and start those early services to get and start maybe improving the behaviors.
Or even seeing what works. ABA is known to be a helpful treatment for lots of kids. You kind of hate to play the game with the insurance companies, but maybe this is a great example of a time when a diagnosis is not the worst thing that you could imagine happening if it gets you access to services.
It's exactly right, because without the diagnosis, he would not be getting the services he's getting. The preschool programs that are offered by the state, we would like for Nolan to go to like a county school, city school, and having an IEP is not the worst thing for us to get him in the school.
I'm not suggesting that people should lie, and definitely not you folks, but even something like an independent education plan means this kid needs some extra help, and this is the reason why, and these are the specific measures that are going to be taken to help this particular child. So even for adults, we were talking a little earlier about maybe depression and anxiety, that there's ways to get help even if you don't have a diagnosis, but then there's additional ways of getting help if you do.
A lot of times children with autism are labeled with like bad behaviors, and my son is actually one of the most passive people you'll ever meet. He's actually never really even thrown a tantrum. So are people going to be like, oh, I don't want that kid? Is he going to be labeled as a bad kid because of what's listed in his record?
Yeah.
And even after preschool, if we want to put him in a mainstream classroom or, quotation marks, normal classroom, are people going to be like, oh, well, he's got autism, so
Yeah.
we don't think he can function in there, when Nolan is very bright because he can memorize things. So, like, he knows how to spell our names. He can spell his name. He can spell toy because he loves the movie Toy Story. And now he's really into math. So he can do, like, math problems. And I'm like, what 4-year-old knows how to do math
Not
problems?
me.
Right?
I can see
okay.
that there would be a fear then of that label of that diagnosis. So not to be talking out of both sides of our mouths here, but there's really pros and cons to this whole process. And I'm wondering,
Exactly.
have you been able to meet other parents or talk with other families that might have a similar situation?
Over the summer, I was taking a class and we had to meet online. And I met 2 ladies from Liberty, which is another reason you should go back to school if you have the opportunity. You make new friends and you find people who are, I was worried. I'm like, oh, am I going to be with a bunch of 18, 19-year-olds? Like, they're going to be like, oh, she's old. No, I have met 2 other moms, and we all have children with autism. And my friend that I've met here, her oldest son just got diagnosed with it. And he had, like, the sweetest answer. He's like, oh, good. He's like, I can go through this with my brother and help him. And I'm like, oh, that is so precious. He's probably 5th or 6th grade, the oldest one. The youngest one, I think, is a little more severe. So he's had the diagnosis already.
Yeah.
So it's great to talk to her, because before I got here, I was able to start finding out where's a good speech therapist, where's my ABA therapist. Like, I was already reaching for those resources. Resources are so important, definitely educate yourself. And then the lady I met through my summer class, her son is the same age as Nolan, but they are just now going through the IEP process, the individual education plan.
Yeah.
And she's like, this is so stressful. She's like, they are testing him all the time. And it's stressful. And it stinks when people are like, oh, well, your kid can't do this, can't do this, can't do this, can't do this. And you're making these goals. And it sounds so awful, but it's going to help in the long run. And it is a long process. Like, buying a house, buying a car. These things aren't short processes. And so basically you're making almost like an instruction manual for the next teacher or therapist who's going to be working with your child. And you definitely want that thorough, because, if you leave your kid with a babysitter, you're not like, all right, see ya. Like, you leave instructions. So if your child has special needs, you want instructions, because if you cannot get these services, you're like, oh, well, it's in this plan, it's a document, he needs these services.
Yeah,
so
and we'd like to
important.
think of social work as a strengths-based kind of philosophy, or even faith. There's good in the world, and there's bad also, but to have, I don't want any parent to feel like, oh, they're getting hit over the head when they're like, well, your kid can't do this, your kid can't do that. But if it's written down, then you can also see progress.
Yes.
And are the treatments being effective? And I don't know if every state has this, but where I used to live in Massachusetts, the rule was to have a least restrictive environment. Try that first. And then if that doesn't work, then have more supports available. So when you were talking about, can you do the mainstream classroom, there's still some time before that happens, but let's see, can that work?
I was just telling the mom, just hang in there. You need support, vent, prayer. I'm here. It's just nice to know that there's other people going through the same thing as you. Like, we discussed MOPS earlier, and it's great to know that there was, in my situation, military spouses or military moms who were with kids overseas, so we could get together and discuss that, hey, it stinks that our husbands aren't home for dinner, or, they're gone for a week. So support groups are amazing. It doesn't even have to be a support group. Just a good friend. We have honestly been so blessed that everywhere we have been, God's put people there to welcome us with open arms and offer us support.
It's a two-way street though too, because you have this other mom that you had mentioned, her child is older than your child, so you might be able to learn things from her, but then this other woman is going through a process that you may have already been through some aspects of that process, so you might be able to share some support and wisdom with that person. The last question that I have for you, Carol, I'm wondering, the verse talks about justice. What does justice look like for you at this time of your life?
Justice is obviously getting treated fairly, but I don't think fair is your life being perfect, because I don't think that's the way it was intended. But I think, at least for it to be somewhat fair, it's us having the right tools to be able to deal with the problems or giants that we're facing.
So maybe having access to some things that you need. And then also, I want to give you kudos, because I think it takes courage to reach out and to say, yeah, this might be a help to me. Like maybe some people would say, no, I don't want a nurse coming to my house. And that's okay. That's your right. But it sounds like it was wonderful for you. Or, picking up the phone to make that appointment for your son to see if there's a diagnosis or not. I suspect that took a lot of mental and emotional energy to make those happen. And I suspect that there's a shortage of services for some people in some areas, and you had a little bit of experience with that in the military setting. But I also would pray that we can advocate for each other in terms of accessibility of services. Are there enough providers? Are there enough programs, like you had mentioned earlier, to provide for the needs of the people in that area?
Yeah, there are some people who make too much money to apply for Medicaid, but can't really afford like insurance in like a private sector. So, like I said, I've just learned that there's quite a few gaps in the social programs that I kind of just know like just the tip of it. But I definitely would like to be more educated in that, so that hopefully we can figure out something, because those are the people that kind of get overlooked, I guess, because they're like, oh, well, they're not poor, but they're not, rich, or
just the in-between. And health insurance is really expensive.
It is. And like I said, I honestly hadn't had to think about it since, I married Edmund, who's in the military. But like I said, when I start to feel bad for myself, I kind of have to snap out of it and just be like, no, you have it good. You're good. You need to think about other people. So that's something I do try to do, is whenever I think my life is just going in the hole, I just try to remember that it could always be worse. And there's people who do have it worse than me. And not that makes me feel better, but it just reminds me, reality check, that, just because like my phone battery died, that's not the end of the world. There's definitely worse things. Or, my kid got chocolate ice cream on the couch. That's, I'm thankful I have a couch. I'm thankful I have a child. I'm thankful we had ice cream to give them.
Oh, yeah. That's such a nice way of saying it. Is there anything else that's on your heart today, Carol, about any of the topics that we've talked about?
Not really. I just want to say that if you are experiencing a season that just seems like a rainy season, don't be afraid to ask for people for help. Don't be afraid to ask support groups, or reach out to your primary care physician. I mean, there's a lot of resources out there. And just remember, sometimes those rainy seasons bring sunshine, and they make us stronger, and we can learn from them. We can't just have sunny weather all the time, and that's kind of the way it is with our life. Like, it just can't always be good, or we'll never really grow or appreciate these things. So it's definitely, some of those seasons seem really long and endless.
Yes, like just they're never going to end. And we don't have a timeline on everything, but I'm so glad you said that. There's people, there's groups, there's also phone numbers, there's websites, there's books, just depending on your style of maybe learning about different situations. And I'm hearing you encourage people to reach out.
Yeah. I have the Bible up on my phone. There's some little plans in there, plans of encouragement. This could just be a time that God's just trying to get your attention, and to just not lose heart, to definitely seek help if you feel like you need it.
One word of encouragement that you had said before was you connected in different ways with different people. So like one provider, you kind of felt like you didn't really make a connection. And then the next provider, now you didn't ask for somebody different. You just got somebody different, but there was a different connection with the next person. So I would want to encourage that also, that sometimes it's just the conversation clicks more with another person. And we might not always find that right match the first time. And I know sometimes there's not a lot of choices, but that's a great example that you gave.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Carol. I really appreciate your sharing and your insights.
Thank you for having me.
Dear Heavenly Father, we come into your presence to thank you for all your love, favor, and blessings that you have placed into our lives. We thank you for the new mornings. Just as the sun rises, you have given us another day to rise as well. We are honored with all the blessings you have given us, no matter the size, large or small. Please help our brothers and sisters in Christ for their discomforts or anxieties as they're waiting to know what is to come next into their lives. Help the answers come more quickly than expected so that their families can prepare to do their next step. We know that you are always on time. Lord, we come to you and ask you to assist with letting go of any unhealthy habits, limiting beliefs, and unloving self-talk and thoughts. Help us to let go of what does not serve us for your goodness and love. Open our eyes to see ourselves as you see us. Open our ears to really hear you, and open our hearts to love ourselves as we should. Please replace what does not serve us with your love, your word, and your guidance. We welcome your encouragement and you into our lives to be the person, mother, wife, brother, husband, and friend you intended us to be. Thank you for this transformation with much praise and excitement. Lastly, we praise and give thanksgiving to our medical team, to our first responders, and to our military who show their faith and love of you by praying with their patients and those who are they trying to save. We pray to see more of you in this area. As they show more of you, we know you will show more of yourselves and miracles as well. We all thank you for all that we are and all that we have because of you. We praise your love and wisdom. Thank you. In Jesus' holy name we pray.